This video is part 2 of the DISC Behavioral Profile series, and in this video we will specifically address the S and the C category. So we're going to begin with the S category, which stands for steadiness, and on the screen we can see some descriptors of someone who has scored high in the S category. So this is between 60 and 100. And you can see some words here that describe that high S. So predictable person, stable, steady, team player. These people are usually very pleasant to be around, and you can see some examples here on the screen. So what makes them tick? For a high S, the primary emotion is actually non-emotion, and so this can make them very difficult to read sometimes. They may not always tell you when they're frustrated. And so you typically have to ask a lot more diving questions to really get to how they feel about something. Their primary motivation is security. You will see people that are a high S that they really like to stay in the same position for a long time. They're very loyal. They're not prone to change a lot, and they're pretty typically low risk. So they like security and knowing what's going on around them. They also have a high need to serve. You see a lot of people that are high S, they really get fulfillment and enjoyment out of helping those around them and being in a position where they can help other people excel. So, how to recognize a high S? They are typically introverted, which is different when we looked at the D and the I. They are people-oriented, but different from the high I. So a high I generally gets a lot of energy from being in a room full of a lot of people, where someone who's a high S really values people as well, but they would rather have a couple one-on-one conversations and get to know people a little bit more deeply in that setting where you're with a lot of people. Their body language is typically they like to lean back, hands in pocket, a more steady or a slower pace. They may make smaller hand gestures probably than a high I would, and they might make some eye contact, but they're less likely to look you in the eye and keep that eye contact for a really long time. Under stress, you may get a sense of false compliance. So in a stressful situation, they may just go with the flow, but underneath they may be really frustrated with what's going on and may not tell you about it. So when you're dealing with a high S, you really do want to ask a lot of those good questions and get their input. And like we mentioned, they kind of have this poker face where they're not giving you any emotion. So when you're having a conversation with a high S, here are some tips to keep in mind to make the conversation go well. So they appreciate tested, proven methods. They don't like change for just the sake of change. They want to know that it's going to be productive and that it's going to go well. That goes right into that safety and consistency in the approach. They get frustrated if you don't do what you say you're going to do. So do what you say you're going to do. They will appreciate that. And they also, it's not that they are always against change, but they do need time to think and adapt to change. So when you know that change is coming, especially for the high S, give them as much lead time as possible. They really appreciate the personal connection as opposed to just the business connection. So when you're going into their office and you're going to have a conversation, it's really important to say, hey, how was your family? How was your weekend? They would rather make that personal connection with you than if you were just to walk in and get straight down to business. And they also just like to feel appreciated. They want to know that they're special and that you appreciate them. So some things to avoid when dealing with a high S is a really, really fast environment where you're having change today and you may not even have reasons necessarily all behind it, but you're just moving forward because we're moving forward. That will stress out a high S. Innovation in a new system. They are not always the typical first adopters of new technology and things like that. They want to know that it's going to work before they invest their time and energy into a new system. And the play to win can also be frustrating for them. So they would rather have the whole team win than one person win. So the highly competitive environment might be stressful for them. Okay, so let's take a look at both now the high and the low S. So we looked at some words. So the high S is patient, reliable, steady, loyal. So the low S is the opposite of that. They're more impetuous and impulsive and eager. They're going to be more likely to take on risk than a high S would. And they're going to be more quick to change and adopt new models moving forward. So the high S are people-oriented. And they also are more deliberate. So they're a little bit slower paced. They want to know what's coming. They don't want to move too quickly because they want to get things right. And the low S is more task-oriented, and they're more faster-paced, All right, so we're going to move now into our last category, which is the C for compliance. So a high C, some descriptors here are they're analytical, they're accurate, courteous, diplomatic, they're perfectionistic and precise. So we can see some great examples of people and characters that would be a high C. These people are very detail-oriented. You will typically see them in jobs where they, maybe an accounting job where you're really specific on the details, or an admin assistant where they have to make sure everything is in its proper place. High C's can thrive in those kinds of environments. So what makes them tick? So the primary emotion for a high C is the fear of being wrong, and that's where that perfectionism comes from. And so this can be hard for a high C. When you're approaching a high C if they've made a mistake, you have to do that very carefully, and you have to make sure that you're separating the personal and the business part of that. Their primary motivation is information. They like to gather that information, to see all of the information before they move forward. And their primary need is to be right. That's that perfectionistic nature again, just coming out. They like to be right 100% of the time if possible. So when dealing with how to recognize a high C, they are also introverted, just like the high S was, but they are more task-oriented. So these people get a lot of energy checking their boxes, checking things off their list. They might be the type of person who, after they've done a lot of things, would still write it off and check off those boxes because they like checking off those boxes. For body language, they might have their arms folded, hands on their chin. They're probably going to walk in a straight line, be a little reserved, and they'll also have little eye contact, kind of similar to the S. Under stress, they're going to get more and more critical, so just be aware of that because they're going to be looking for all the different pieces to pick apart and see all of the details. And one clue that they might be a high C is how they ask their questions. If they're asking really deep dive, detailed questions, that's a really good indicator that they're probably a high C. So in dealing with a high C, things you want to be aware of is that they're going to appreciate it if you keep things on track and are predictable. So if you're in a meeting, it's important to stick to the agenda and the time. They will really appreciate that. They like the detailed outlines. They want to be able to trust that your answers are correct and that they can be proven, and they really like that background data before they're going to move forward. Some things that might stress out a high C is if you're just trying to be clever or funny, especially if you're guessing and you don't have data to prove the facts that you're moving forward with. And also experiments may or may not be a problem for them, but if the experiment's moving forward without a lot of detail behind it or experience behind it, that can be really frustrating for them as well. So as we look at the high C and the low C, the high C, once again, is dependent, neat. They probably have a really organized office a lot of the time. Or even if it's not organized, they know where everything is. So they're careful, and they're also really compliant. They're rule followers. They actually like to have the rules in place because then they know what's expected of them, and then they can meet those expectations. So for a low C, on the opposite end, they are more careless with details, they're unbending, they're uninhibited, all of those kinds of things. So as we try and decide who high C is, so high C's are task-oriented. Once again, they get all that energy from checking things off their list. And they're also more deliberate, meaning they're a little bit slower paced than some of the others. They like to have time to get all of their ducks in a row. And they typically, and a lot of times, they can spend too much time on details. They can be notorious for that because they want to have everything perfect. And so it can be sometimes hard for them to even meet a deadline because they're trying to get everything exactly correct. On the other side, the low C's tend to be more people-oriented. They get energy from being around people, and they are more fast-paced. So on this next slide, I'm just going to bring in all four of the dimensions that we've talked about, and you can kind of read through these, and they just kind of talk about that high category. So all of these are the high categories. So the D, when communicating, be clear, stick to business, be prepared, and with supported materials. With a high I, you want a warm and friendly environment, ask feeling questions, let them talk. Being curt or controlling can be really frustrating for them. For the high S, you want to begin with a personal comment, break the ice, how's your family, how are you doing? And then don't rush headlong with them, give them time to think and process. And then the high C, make sure you've prepared your case in advance, that you have all of your details, that you stick to business. Things that frustrate them are being disorganized or giddy or pushing too hard. So here's one way to look at this. You can actually ask yourself 2 questions when you're watching a person, and you can do this. You can people watch and ask these questions. Sometimes you can get these correct. So one question you can ask is, are they task-oriented or are they people-oriented? So task-oriented puts them in the C or the D category. These people get energy from tasks. Conversely, the I and the S are more people-oriented, and we talked about kind of how that's different between the S and the I. And so you can ask that question, does this person get energy from completing tasks or being around people? And then you can kind of start to put them in one of these quadrants. The other question you can ask is, are they fast-paced or are they more deliberate or slower paced? So the D and the I move kind of on that fast side. They're always moving, they're always going. Where the C and the S are more deliberate and they need a little bit more time to get things done because they want to just have that accuracy piece there. So those are the 2 questions you can kind of ask to make sure, or just to see what that person might fall into, so that then when you go have conversations with them, you're a little bit more prepared on what they would appreciate in terms of how you communicate. So then we have also aggressive and passive that sits there as well. And I'm just going to throw these up here as well, just so you can be reminded. We kind of talked about this. So the dominant emotion for a high D is anger, and their dominant fear is being taken advantage of. It's important when you're communicating with that person that you realize it so that you can approach them in the right manner, that they might then be able to respond positively with you. The high I, the dominant emotion is optimism. They love to see the silver lining. And their biggest fear is social rejection. So they want to know that they're appreciated, that you love being around them, all of those kinds of things. So then the high S, remember, was no emotion. So they won't always tell you. You've got to ask lots of questions. And their biggest fear is change. So just be really aware of that. We can't avoid change. Change is going to happen. So just be mindful of the high S when change is coming. And then for the high C, the dominant emotion is fear, and especially of being criticized. And so just be, when you're sitting down and having to talk to a person who's a high C that maybe has made a mistake, just be very gentle and use your words very carefully and make sure they understand how they can then move past that and continue to progress, because that will help them be motivated to go into the future. So that's the end of this presentation. I wanted to just give a huge thank you to Price Associates. They provided the slide deck for our presentation, and also to Target Training International, who provided the assessments that you were able to take.